Dawson's Rambles.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Ryder here. I wanted to do another we'll see how long this video is. It's not going to be 20 minutes, I promise, but topic video on the Power Rangers franchise recently, as there's been a lot of talk about the franchise's future as things look very uncertain right now, with Cosmic Fury looking to be the last season for a while. You know, the reboot is supposedly still on track, but it looks like that could possibly take a while due to the strike. Maybe even, there's, thought of it being shelved just because of the way everything's going for an indefinite amount of time. I still believe we'll get it eventually, but it could be a lot longer than we're thinking, and, even longer than we've already been waiting. Not to mention the news that the Lightning Collection will be taking a hiatus for a year, with presumably most everything else in regards to merchandise taking a hiatus. So it looks like for the year 2024, we're in for a quiet time. And, I think Power Rangers will return, but it's a very uncertain future at the moment. And there's a lot of, criticism and discussion about how Hasbro's handled the brand, how other ones have handled the brand. And today this isn't necessarily about talking about necessarily how one brand handled it. I'll be talking about stuff with it, but this isn't about criticizing one brand or the other, but more so what I think is kind of an overarching problem for the franchise, which I think Power Rangers franchise is worst enemy is Power Rangers itself. A lot of the times MMPR itself mostly, but I think Power Rangers and MMPR is kind of its own worst enemy. Again, I think all of the brands have had missteps, meaning like Hasbro and Saban. I think all of them have had good ideas and successes, but I think they've all made a lot of mistakes. But I think a lot of the times when it comes to growing and evolving the franchise, Power Rangers gets in its own way, kind of intentionally and unintentionally, and it creates this kind of interesting conversation where I feel things are often kind of at a stalemate, where it's a conversation I see a lot amongst the fandom more so, but I think it's indicative of the conversation and the reception that happens, the conversation that happens behind the scenes and then the reception of the show. And I think this comes from two different things. I think in terms of Power Rangers, it's very frustrating because I think the concept and the idea has immense potential to be successful. I don't think it would ever be a huge juggernaut brand like Marvel or even Transformers, but I think it has potential to be something around maybe even the TMNT thing, where it's like a generally known franchise that doesn't quite get as much disrespect. But I think just the concept has so much potential to be really cool and to be more than it is, but there's a couple key things that hold it back. I think number one is the public perception. I think that holds it back no matter what. As I've mentioned in previous discussions before, I feel like the general consensus for the casuals is they remember MMPR only. Whenever they see anything Power Rangers related or looks like Power Rangers related, their minds go to MMPR, and the general thought is man, that show was awesome as hell, but also super lame. And that's kind of the reputation it has a hard time shaking. I think that lots of shows have been able to reinvent themselves and have, more mature takes and different takes, even if they had a more childish beginning or whatever, or silly beginning. But for whatever reason, not for whatever reason, we kind of know some of the reasons, but it's just not able to shake that. And it's really hard for them to find a take or a reboot or whatever, or something to change the perception of the public. And it's kind of climbing this uphill battle constantly under the shadow of what people believe is Power Rangers, which is just MMPR, which in part is due to pretty much, actually outside of Disney, I would say, most people that have held the brand put MMPR on the forefront. Disney, honestly, I can't remember doing it that much. They'd kind of just put out the mainline stuff and called it a day. But you know what I mean? For the most part, when it comes to Neo Saban and Hasbro, a lot of MMPR pushing, especially I don't think the last decade of the show helped, where Saban wanted it effectively dialed back to a similar storytelling style to MMPR. So as a result, if for whatever reason, let's say you liked the reboot, or you read a comic and liked it, and thought about the show, and you went to go check out an episode, and you're like, oh, this is the same, and you missed that almost decade where the show did change. However, on the other hand, even though we know or think that stuff like Time Force and SPD is obvious improvement over MMPR, people would probably still view that as the same. So I think that the general concept, it's just heroes transforming into cool costumes and fighting robots, has potential to be something that can be liked. People will enjoy the Godzilla movies. It didn't necessarily do so well, but some casuals like Pacific Rim. Stuff like that. I think the concept has broad appeal, but it's the public perception that will get in its own way, where they just can't see past MMPR, whether it's just they write it off and look down on it, or they are in that mentality of nothing beats the original. And I think that's especially a problem with them looking down on it, is very often amongst all kinds of brands in the similar neighborhood, like even TMNT, I don't see very many people having a disrespect for TMNT. Maybe that's because there's been so many iterations, but for the most part, MMPR and Power Rangers has kind of a stigma. Even when people compliment it, it's kind of what do you call that, a backhanded compliment and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the biggest problems it faces, is its identity and the public perception. It can't break through that ceiling. I think the other problem comes from the fandom internally. And by that I just mean, I think the discussion that the fandom will have, the core discussion about what Power Rangers could and should be, I think is indicative of probably the conversation going on behind the scenes. Is you have some people like myself that are willing to accept a new version and think that there is a value in a potential reboot, making things maybe a little bit more appealing here in the West. Just a fresh take, something different that breaks outside of the box, as we do have a very formulaic box we've been following for the most part over 30 years. And there's a lot of people that are open-minded to it, whether that means clean slate or doing a reboot alongside an existing show. The point is there's people that are saying, like, yeah, we need to change it, try to make it more appealing, break out of that status quo that we talked about. But then you have other people that are like, no, Power Rangers has to be this one way, like this is what makes it appealing, this is what makes it special, and stuff like that, and it should never change. And then you have that interesting thing in the middle where you have people like, man, the show sucks the last 10 years, this is just cancel it, and then they cancel it, and they're like, no! Or the show sucks the last 10 years, they need to change it. We're gonna change it. No! It's like, what do you people want? Honestly, you'll just never be happy. But I think that conversation kind of represents this stalemate. It's like we know that the brand needs to change and evolve and change public perception, but then people also don't want it to change what it currently is and what it's supposed to be. But if it never changes, it's never going to be able to break that public perception. Like, again, in an ideal world, I think we would be able to have some sort of reboot series that would broaden the appeal and open up people's eyes to Power Rangers, and then have something like what we know that people like about it. But that's not realistic at the moment. I don't think that's not necessarily unrealistic in the long run, as there's many franchises that will have different iterations for different sects of the fandom and different age groups. But as of right now, they're having a hard time handling one project. But I think that's where Power Rangers gets in its own way, is I think there's a desire for it to be successful and to continue, but also a lot of fans that just want to keep it in this box. And like, I understand the idea of like, there's certain things that make it unique, that's true, but I also think that's very subjective, about what's special to you about Power Rangers might not be special to somebody else. And I think that in general, when you come to discussions like this about franchises, usually the hardcore fandom has a very specific idea of what they think the franchise should be, and they think it should only be catered to that. And I think that's dangerous in the case of Power Rangers, because the Power Rangers Toku fandom is one of the smallest hardcore fandoms, and if you only cater to that and what they think is appealing, it's not going to be very successful. I feel like sometimes the fandom has a hard time seeing past itself. Like, well, me and my 5 fandom friends like Time Force, so obviously if they did a Time Force Once and Always special, it would be successful. Like, no. Casuals don't give an F about Time Force. I'm sorry, they just don't. That's not going to be the key to it. But it's an interesting conversation, because amongst all of the mishandlings, and again, don't get me wrong, there's been mishandlings in the brand, I think that Power Rangers, for whatever reason, is a very difficult brand to handle. It's like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but it's like choosing a video game character or a racing character or something when you're getting ready to play a competitive game that you think, oh, this is going to be really easy, and then it's not. Because that's what's very frustrating about Power Rangers, is like, on paper it has all these appealing elements that it could be really broadly appealing and go in all kinds of different directions, and yet it has this really hard time, this really big uphill battle to face when it comes to public perception and the fans kind of being locked in at this stalemate of like, yes, I want it to be more successful and be better, but also never change ever. And I think that's something to think about, is I think Hasbro kind of putting things on pause is because they kind of don't know what to do. They don't know how to make it successful. I think that they've seen stuff like the 2017 reboot and previous attempts, and they're worried about, like, what if we just, crash and burn again, and they've seen that it's kind of hard to break outside of that stigma and outside of what's popular. Okay, I'm not making excuses for them, I'm just saying I think that's why we've never seen, in general, Power Rangers move past a certain point, because I think it's an uphill battle they face, and I think that that's part of the reason we're on ice right now, is they just can't figure out the right approach. But what do you guys think? Do you think Power Rangers' own worst enemy is itself, or more specifically mmpr? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.